Hey guys, Kyle here. So, just before the show starts, I wanted to mention our Patreon. You can pay us $1 a month as a thank you, as a tip. You can pay $2 a month to get access to one of our bonus content shows, episodes 2 days early, and a secret Discord chat where all of our Patreon donors get to go and hang out and talk with us directly. Then there's a $5 tier that you can donate to get access to a whole bunch more content. We have multiple bonus episodes on there. So please check it out. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. We don't advertise. We don't make money. So check it out and throw some money if you think that would be cool. Thanks. Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try and make your world a little weirder. I'm Kyle.
Hey, and I'm Niall.
And this week we have a special guest, one of my friends, Aleks, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Aleks. I've known Kyle for probably 4 or 5 years now.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Time flies.
Truly does. Oof.
Yeah. Well, I was talking with Aleks a few weeks ago, and he was getting into UFO lore with me, and I figured he would be a good guest to have on the show. So we're finally having you on the show, and I was just telling you guys before the show, I wanted to do a UFO story, and I found a very interesting one that I think you're both going to enjoy. So for the It Gets Weird Patreon, Niall and I have been watching the dramatized History Channel TV series based on the real-life Project Blue Book and Dr. Allen Hynek. Do you know about that stuff, Aleks?
Oh, yeah. Love Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Quite a character. Blue Book is super interesting. And I've actually really wanted to watch the History Channel show, so you have to let me know if it's any good or not.
Well, it's free on Peacock
if
you don't mind a couple ads. But it's I like it. I will say at this point, it took me a couple episodes to be 100% sure, but I think I like it now.
Same. So. Yeah, I have pretty much the same review. And for those who are maybe not aware, Project Blue Book was the real life United States Air Force basically research program into the phenomenon of UFOs. And this show, it covers these real-life cases, but in a very dramatic way. There are tons of cases, so I wanted to investigate one, and we have, in retrospect, discussed Blue Book cases before. The one that comes to mind right off the bat for me is Zani Lamora, the Italian who keeps getting abducted.
Oh, yeah.
There's a whole bunch, and I was excited to find that this one had extensive documentation declassified from Blue Book's research. This is the Red Bluff Incident. Sound familiar to anybody?
I have not heard about this.
Yeah, I don't think I have either.
Okay, cool. That's what I like to hear. This one is maybe only still alive in the public conscience because of not just Project Blue Book, but UFO investigation organizations. This case would have basically been swept under the rug by Blue Book had it not been for UFO researchers stepping in and documenting everything. So the story begins on a Saturday night on August 13th, 1960. It is shortly before midnight, and it's about 10 minutes till, so 11:50 p.m. So, painting a picture, it's hot as fuck in Tehama County, California, and in the nearby towns of Corning and Red Bluff, where this story takes place, it is just, I think it reached like 100 degrees recently in the story. So it's hot.
Jesus.
This is a sparsely populated area of California. To give you some kind of idea of what this kind of encounter looked like, we're talking... In 1960, Corning had a population of 3,000, and then Red Bluff had a little over 7,000. So it's those two small towns kind of interacting throughout this case and word of mouth of this UFO encounter. So just east of Corning, two California Highway Patrol officers, Charles Carson and Stanley Scott, were searching for a speeding motorcyclist along a particular stretch of highway.
So these people, anytime I hear the fact that both people have like the same letter for first and last names, I always immediately am like, okay, so this is like a comic story from the 60s. Because the writer is writing like too many things and they have to remember all of the different fucking characters they have to remember. So the fact that it's Charles Connor and Steve...
Charles Carson and Stanley Scott, which I didn't even notice that, Scott. But you're right.
And the missing, the speeding motorcyclist was Peter Parker.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, as far as I can tell, they never actually find Peter Parker because it was during this chase. It's not a chase. They were looking for this like speeding motorcyclist, I guess. They never find him. This is when they witnessed something they could not explain. Now, here's why this case kicks ass, because I have the actual straight up documents from Project Blue Book to read from here, exactly as they reported on this case. And you can find them on archive.org if you're interested. So from those docs, here's Carson's official report to the CHP area commander. Officer Scott and I were eastbound on Hogue Road, east of Corning, looking for a speeding motorcycle when we saw what at first appeared to be a huge airliner dropping from the sky. The object was very low and directly in front of us. We stopped and leaped from the patrol vehicle in order to get position on what we were sure was going to be an airplane crash. From our position outside the car, the first thing we noticed was an absolute silence. Still assuming it to be an aircraft with power off, we continued to watch until the object was probably within 100 feet to 200 feet of the ground, when it suddenly reversed completely, at high speed, and gained approximately 500 feet of altitude. There, the object stopped. At this time, it was clearly visible to both of us and obviously not an aircraft of any design familiar to us. It was surrounded by a glow, making the round or oblong object visible. At each end, or each side of the object, were definite red lights. At times, about 5 white lights were visible between the red lights. As we watched, the object moved again and performed aerial feats that were actually unbelievable. At this time, we radioed Tehama County Sheriff's Office requesting they contact local radar base. The radar base confirmed the UFO, completely unidentified. So, they see this thing do insane maneuvers, and then they radio another sheriff effectively and say, can you check with the radar base nearby and see what this is? And they call up the radar base, and the radar base says, wow, we see that too. No clue.
That's so strange. It reminds me kind of those, the Tic Tac and the 2 other videos that the Pentagon released, I want to say last year or earlier.
Yeah.
The Tom DeLonge videos?
Yeah, actually, yes.
Yeah.
The fact that it wasn't a flying saucer, it was the sort of other like cigar-shaped UFO is like how it's kind of classified.
Mm-hmm.
And they just do crazy maneuvers, and pilots and radar technicians are like, we've never seen anything like this ever.
Yeah. It is interesting how like the reports of just like insane aerial maneuvers are like consistent from the 60s and 50s all the way through to today. And interestingly, when I was looking up this case, it was a lot of search results were actually giving me that video to watch. But I don't think they're related in any way, but they're definitely similar. And this is not the pill-shaped one. You will find soon that they kind of think it was sort of football-shaped.
Oh.
Yeah, kind of like the Hey Arnold of UFOs, basically.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Or the Real Monsters. What was that? The purple guy's name?
Grungo.
Yeah, Grungo. So really we're dealing with like 90s Nickelodeon shapes here.
Yeah. This is the precursor to 90s Nickelodeon. This is what inspired everything. But yeah, the report goes on and it says, Officer Scott and myself, after our verification, continued to watch the object. On 2 occasions, the object came directly towards the patrol vehicle. Each time it approached, the object swept the area with a huge red light. Officer Scott turned the red light on the patrol vehicle towards the object, and it immediately went away from us. We observed the object use the red beam approximately 6 or 7 times, sweeping the sky and ground areas. The object began moving slowly in an easterly direction, and we followed. We proceeded to the Vena Plains fire station, where we again were able to locate the object. As we watched, it was approached by a similar object from the south. It moved near the first object and both stopped, remaining in that position for some time, occasionally emitting the red beam. Finally, both objects disappeared below the eastern horizon. We returned to the Tehama County Sheriff's Office and met Deputy Fry and Deputy Montgomery, who had gone to Los Molinos after contacting the radar base. Both had seen the UFO clearly and described to us what we saw. The night jailer, which the night jailer here is a reference to a thing we'll get into later. But it says the night jailer also was able to see the object for a short time. Each described the object and its maneuvers exactly as we saw them. We first saw the object at 2350 hours and observed it for approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes. Each time the object neared us, we experienced radio interference. We submit this report in confidence for your information. We were calm after our initial shock and decided to observe and record all we could of the object. So that's their official report, and you can find this in Project Blue Book. Now, the most important and often discussed aspect of this case is the contacting of the local radar base. So it was the Deputy Clarence Fry at the Tehama County Sheriff's Office who received Carson and Scott's radio report on the incident, and then it was Fry who went on to contact the Red Bluff U.S. Air Force Base to get an official confirmation from the radar station. And the other guy, Deputy Montgomery, was there with him. And it's also believed, we'll get into this, but it's also believed that the night jailer that they refer to is either also Deputy Fry or just an unnamed person who is at the county sheriff's office with Deputy Fry.
What I want to know is which Bloodborne boss is the night jailer?
Yeah, when you said night jailer, I mean, it was like, what is that kind of? Is that like a kind of alien ship, or like a? When I realized, no, it's just a guy that works at a jail at night.
Well, I mean, Bloodborne is apt, but I also couldn't help but picture like, you know, an old timey western with the guy who like hangs out in the like 2-person jail cell, you know, with the like keys dangling from his waist and stuff. That's what went into my mind, but it's also the 1960s, long after the time of cowboys. So.
True. So they just wait for him to fall asleep, and they get a stick from the corner and they try to lift the keys off of him.
Right. Exactly. They wait for the telltale honk shoes coming out of his mouth and his hat tilted down before they make a move.
Yeah, because he's always leaned back on 2 legs of a chair, braced against the wall, hat over his eyes, so you can really get some good fucking grabbage at those keys.
You both nailed exactly what I was picturing in my mind when I read the term night jailer. But honestly, if I think about it for even a second, there has to also be night jailers or night jail guards or whatever. There's probably a different term for basically the same thing in modern times, so...
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just like the night shift at a jail. Like, that's all we're talking about here. But that's way less fun than thinking of either a monstrous boss in Bloodborne or just the cartoonish fucking deputy in the jail at night.
Well, what's funny, too, is one of the details that gets kind of added to this case is when Deputy Fry and his night jailer buddy were contacted. Apparently, this is the time in the 1960s, I guess, where you could, like, and then you're, like, in this small enough town with a small enough jail, where apparently when they reported on the case later in an article in, like, a local newspaper, he apparently, like, marched 4 of the prisoners in the jail, like, out to the front steps of the jail to, like, help him witness this UFO.
Okay, so that makes sense, but I also, like, every time I hear... I guess I don't really hear about this a lot, but what I was thinking was, like, we don't trust criminals, like, in our system for anything. So, like, why are you trying to take these criminals, like, that are in jail and use them as fucking, like, witnesses to this event? It seems like a silly reaction to that in that space, just with how, like, our jail system works.
Mm-hmm. Well... at the time, this is, coincidentally enough, all 4 of the jailed criminals happened to be ufologists, so they just plucked them out of their cells to get them to come look at this real quick.
Fair.
That's not true. I lied. That was a bit. I'm sorry. Yeah, so it was Fry, like I said, who contacted Red Bluff U.S. Air Force Base to get that confirmation. And the U.S. Air Force Base was like, yeah, you got a UFO, boys. Now, getting a consistent timeline of events here is a bit screwy, and I kind of have to go off of multiple news reports, a radio interview, and Project Blue Book's official investigation. We also have multiple sightings by other locals that may or may not be related to the incident witnessed by Scott and Carson. But the next kind of piece in the timeline that I could figure was that the day after their strange experience, officers Carson and Scott drove to Red Bluff Air Station themselves, hoping to talk with the operator who had confirmed their UFO sighting. Now, here's where this gets interesting. When they got there and they talked to people, they were surprised to find that the Air Force was now denying that they had picked up anything out of ordinary on their radar at all. Their meeting with Air Force at Red Bluff was completely unproductive. They were like, we got nothing, there was nothing, we don't know what you saw, it's probably nothing. So, pretty typical response here, although it is really weird that they would walk back the sighting after their operator initially confirmed it.
Well, the Men in Black got to them.
That's fair. There's other factors in this there's other potential explanations. Let's just say that.
I think that's something that happens a good amount of the time when the Air Force and or another federal government body is involved in UFO sightings, where they'll confirm it. They'll say, yes, we see this on our radar. Yes, we have all these people saying that they see it. And then after a higher up or whoever reams into them for admitting that there's a UFO, then everyone sort of gets in line and says, okay, never mind. We didn't see that. This doesn't exist.
Yes, this is a Project Blue Book case, and we'll get more into this, but one of the things that a lot of UFO people will kind of generally agree on is that Blue Book was kind of exactly, well, if you see the Blue Book TV show, it's all about like covering the case up, making sure nobody asks questions, right?
Neil got to him.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of UFO researchers think that this is effectively what Blue Book ended up being. It started as Project Sign as a legitimate research project, and eventually over time morphed into this like cover-up thing. I can't speak to any truth on that, but that is kind of what the UFO people who research this case seem to believe. So, at the time of their reporting, there would be no military investigation of the incident. Nonetheless, the story of the officer's encounter would spread quickly via local media and word of mouth. On August 16th, a few days after the incident, local radio station KBLF would interview both of the officers about what they saw. I'm not going to share the whole interview, but there's a couple pieces of it that sort of elucidate some things not included in initial reports and news articles. So the interviewer asks, the very first moment you saw the unidentified flying object, what was your first feeling? And Scott says, at first I didn't have any feeling until the object had performed a few maneuvers and then appeared to be coming straight toward the patrol car. At that time, I did get scared, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I was quite shocked. Then they ask, once again, it looked like it had either a row of lights or a row of windows on the side of the object. Is this right? And Scott responds, yes, it appeared to be windows. The windows were only visible when the object would turn at a certain angle to us. It appeared to have to manipulate the machine in order to get this beam to sweep, in the sense that the beam wasn't movable in itself, that the entire object had to move the beam light, this fixed light. So this thing is flying around. It doesn't have like a rotating light. It's just like fixed on the actual machine itself as it moved around. Then they ask, well, do you say this, that maybe perhaps it knew of your presence there, especially with this red light on? And Scott responds, I firmly believe it was aware of the presence of the light because the object moved away immediately. As Officer Scott brought our red light on, it moved directly away from us. So the interviewer asks, well, then it did move away. Did it move away slowly, or did it do this all at once with speed? And Scott responds, it moved away fairly fast. It moved so swiftly that we lost sight of it. That is when we lost it the first time. And then, of course, later on, they went and found it again as they followed it in the direction that it was headed. So The interview brings up some other sightings of UFOs locals reported within the few days after the initial incident. This is also where they mention the night jailer and the prisoners in that jail who were witnesses to the UFO. And then some San Francisco residents who were passing through the same highway also called it in and reported it. Deputy Fry, the one who contacted the radar operator, and Montgomery, they, like I said before, drove out to a nearby town of Los Molinos, and they were able to get a view of the object from another angle. And this is all to say that the officers had a ton of witnesses backing up their story. In fact, this is the actual Blue Book report on what Fry and Montgomery witnessed. So it says here, on August 13th, 1960, at about 11:30 p.m., officers Scott and Carson of the California Highway Patrol radioed the Tehama County Sheriff's Office and stated that they were watching a flying object and had been for about 1 hour. At midnight, this officer went to Los Molinos and set on a small hill to the east named or called Blueberry Hill at approximately 12:30 a.m. And they observed 4 objects in the western sky, traveling from the south to the north in a straight line. And at times, they would go straight up or down. One of the objects seemed to stop and hover over the Red Bluff area. After a short time, there was an object seen going from north to the south. So here's where things get a little sticky. With Fry's reporting of events, things are inconsistent. The original sighting between Scott and Carson describes moving eastward to track the object, while Fry claims to have observed 4 objects in the western sky, and this suggests that they were facing opposite directions. Even more awkward, Fry would report the sighting as taking place 23 hours after when Scott and Carson claimed to have seen the object, which would be at 10:05 p.m. to 10:10 p.m. on the 14th. Now, interestingly, Project Blue Book actually has documents to suggest that Fry's report was made in error. You can find an extract of operations log from the Red Bluff Air Force Base in the Project Blue Book files, and this excerpt shows that the Air Force Base has Fry recorded as calling in at 1:05 a.m. instead of 10:05 p.m. This would make a lot more sense, obviously, because then it's on the same timeline as the original incident. And then the document also shows...
they just...
Sorry, go ahead.
Like, they just messed up in recording what time he called in? Like, the Blue Book people did? Even though it was, like, in the written record at the Air Force Base?
I think what happened here is that Fry reported incorrectly. That somehow he misread the time or something, gave the wrong time, but the records that Blue Book was able to extract from the Air Force Base have him recorded, like, at 1:05 a.m. as opposed to 10:05 p.m. the next day. So it's like a shifting of zeros happened.
What's really crazy about that is that almost an identical thing happened in are either of you familiar with the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident?
Yeah,
the exact same thing happened because that incident, the first one happened, I want to say, on a Wednesday, and it was recorded as happening on the Thursday. And that's one of the things that debunkers try to point out is that it was reported wrong. And so whenever they use like the following day or the previous day, like in the reporting, it gets all jumbled because no one knows actually when certain things happened.
Yeah, that exactly. That's so. What if we're to put on our conspiracy helmets here for a moment? Then classified Project Blue Book stuff had the actual correct times from the Air Force Base, but the report that was more public at the time has the incorrect times. So if we're putting on our conspiracy hats, somebody could be fudging some zeros to make people look ridiculous here, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what's suggested.
So the stories don't line up.
Yes, exactly. That's kind of what people think.
It's really funny that you bring up the Rendlesham Forest thing because I specifically remember in that episode, Kyle being like having to stop. I think I edited at least part of this out, but he had to like go back and like double check earlier in his notes because the days stopped matching. Yeah. And we like had an actual thing. You can go back to our Rendlesham Forest episode and listen to it because I think some of it made it in the episode. But that is explicitly a thing that we were trying to figure out and we got very confused by in that episode. So it's interesting that that's like a somewhat common thing and might have a like conspiratorial disinformation bent to it, as opposed to just like some, bad bookkeeping.
Yeah. Well, and that's funny too, because there are also these cases that ended up involving the U.S. military, right?
Yeah.
And I mean,
the Air Force are tricky some bitches.
Exactly. So they're being maybe they're being slippery here. I don't know for sure, but there's a lot of weird stuff with this one, and the document, when you look into the extractive operations log, it also shows that the Air Force told the officers that the object was likely the satellite Echo 1 and that they had picked up nothing on their radar. So that's the official like portion of bookkeeping by the Air Force, even though the officers swear that when they called in, their UFO sighting was confirmed.
And also like what they saw, it doesn't sound like a satellite at all.
Right.
Like, that seems very. I know that probably goes without saying, but satellites don't dart across the sky like
and
that.
Shoot red beams.
Honestly,
yeah,
a weather balloon is more believable than a satellite.
True. Yeah, I agree.
Well, the satellites, we all know how they have like the weather weapons and like ionized beams and shit. So it's just like fucking it's just weapons from the atmosphere.
True. Can't forget that. Now, and the thing here, I'm gonna just tell you right now. There's some very famous UFO case sort of dismissal explanations, such as weather balloons, swamp gas. And I'm excited to tell you that that's neither of those apply to this case. So we'll get there. Now, there's another complication, which again is weird. There's a sketch of the object in the Blue Book files that lists the same August 14th, 10:05 p.m. sighting. Names are redacted, but it's assumed that the one who they basically were able to blow up this image and like inspect it and find that the person who made the sketch was Deputy Fry. So we can either conclude that the same error was made twice based off of Fry's report, or we can put our conspiracy hats on and ask ourselves, maybe these officers all witnessed another UFO in the same area 23 hours after the initial incident, and this second incident was covered up from the media. Or, like we said before, somebody's fudging numbers or misreporting things so that it looks bad.
It isn't super uncommon for there to be like a for lack of a better word, aftershock sighting to these like
True
UFO sightings. Like it does happen. I think it happened in like the Phoenix Lights a little bit. I think it happened in a couple other cases where like a day apart they'll be seen. It happens with like cryptids too. That seems to be just like a thing, like where they're just in the area for a couple days or like 2 days or whatever. And sometimes the sightings are like, the second ones are never as intense or like noteworthy for the most part, but it does happen.
Yeah.
So one thing I've been wondering is about these red lights, because another very famous case that you see red lights mentioned constantly is Mothman. And in the Mothman case, if the listeners or either of you are very familiar with it, the people who saw the Mothman's eyes, these blinding red lights, had sunburns in their corneas and like on their faces following for a number of weeks. So I'm curious if either of these officers had reported anything about having sunburns after getting hit with the UFO's red light.
Well, so there's definitely been cases that we've covered in the past where people had burns and stuff, but this one, I don't think it ever actually reached them with the red beam of light. Basically, as I understand it, they saw it project this red beam of light onto the ground and as if like kind of probing for something, and then they turned on the red light from their like police car, and as soon as they turned that light on, the object like immediately started to move away from them very quickly. So I don't think they ever got hit with it, because there's at no point do they report receiving burns. I don't think it ever got that close.
Okay.
But we've definitely talked about
direct
that.
contact.
Yeah, no direct contact. But that is a common theme in, especially like experiences, encounters of the third kind. Those ones you will find the sunburn and like radiation, sickness and things like that much more often. But this was from a distance. They never got that close to it.
Okay.
Gotcha.
So, back to the night jailer. In an article that was published August 16th, 1960 by the California paper Daily Facts, which gotta be an exciting paper based on that name.
That's the most like a statistician is running the newspaper thing I've ever heard. Because like most time it's like, oh yeah, the New York Gazette. Oh, the Sun Times. No, this is your Daily Facts. This is just the facts, no bias here, kind of nonsense.
Yeah. Why not spice it up a little bit? How about a California paper called Check This Shit Out? But yeah, in this newspaper, the details of the incident were reported on, and it actually, this is where you end up identifying the night jailer referenced in Project Blue Book documents as Deputy Clarence Fry. And this is an important reference material I discovered because Blue Book documentation redacts the name of the jailer. It redacts like basically everybody's names. So we have this article that suggests it was Deputy Fry. And in both reports, like I said, this jailer took 4 of the prisoners out on the front steps and had them observe the UFO with him, presumably as a sanity-preserving measure. So with all of this in mind, we have a pretty good timeline of what happened. We have Carson and Scott making their sightings, and then Fry and Montgomery travel to Los Molinos to get a look, but they also see multiple different objects. Then Fry returns to Red Bluff, where they now have the information on him as the quote-unquote jailer. And then Montgomery makes a radio report from Los Molinos, and then Fry goes out to look and see an object that is like in a position west of about from him. And then this is the one that actually matches the description of officers Carson and Scott. Then they bring the jail people out. They bring the prisoners out to witness. Then Fry watches it take off in a southerly direction. And then moments later, Corning police radioed. The object was moving west of Corning, going south. And then at some point in all this, the officers Carson and Scott state the first object was approached by a similar object from the south. Second object moved near the first object and both stopped and remained in that position for some time, occasionally emitting the red beam. And then finally, both objects disappeared below the eastern horizon some 2 hours and 15 minutes after their initial sighting, so it would be approximately a little after 2 a.m. So that's the timeline of how it all went down. And it's at this point, a few days later, that the story breaks. And on August 17th, it's now 4 days after, technically 3, because really it kind of really kicks off at midnight. It's 4 days after Scott and Carson's fateful sighting, and an Associated Press article brought national attention to the case. It was also revealed in the article that the Air Force would indeed be investigating. So here it says, Hamilton AFB officers said, "We are required by regulations to look into all UFO reports for analysis by experts at Wright-Patterson, Dayton, Ohio. Up to the present," said Hamilton AFB spokesman, "the Air Force has been able to explain all UFO appearances, except in 0.1% of the cases. In the exceptions, there has not been enough information for the report to be pinned down." So, for people who know the deep lore of Blue Book, Wright-Patterson Base is the headquarters for those operations. And it's also important to know, like I said before, that UFO believers are highly skeptical of Blue Book's sincerity in their investigation of the phenomenon. So, for instance, the officer in that article claims that only 0.1% of the cases are unsolved. And they say this is very misleading because the Air Force put out a statistic saying that 3% are unsolved. But then if you go by Blue Book's numbers based on their cases, 1,500 of the 12,618 cases that they investigated were unsolved. And I think that's about 12%.
So did they were just like, were they using more strict criteria to get their 0.1%, or like what? Do you know where that number comes from, or is that just like propaganda effectively?
I'm not entirely sure because I don't have like reference material from, like, the guy just said it and it appeared in an article. I don't know if that's based off of anything for real. And then the article that I was reading from said that the Air Force's official stance is that 3% are unsolved. So that's what I know. Now, Blue Book stepped in to handle the investigation and produce the reports that I've been reading from. Further to the point of the misleading data, a smattering of UFO sightings would occur around the same time as Scott and Carson's, and these were included in the Tehama County Sheriff's Supplemental Crime Report, which details UFO witness accounts between August 8th and August 20th, 1960. And this includes an additional sighting by Deputy Fry's partner, Montgomery, and at the end of the day, there were 30 unsolved cases in California alone at the time. So, Project Blue Book has a big ask here, which is to try and solve all these cases. Provost Marshal, which was a military police title at the time, this man, Dwayne Bilsland, was the one chosen to investigate the case on behalf of Project Blue Book from August 18th to the 21st of 1960. And his field report would then filter up to Major Robert Friend, who was the then acting chief of Project Blue Book. Friend would then...
I feel like we've talked about that name before.
He's
definitely... Is that guy?
Definitely. I guarantee you Robert Friend has appeared in our show before, because all of the cases throughout the life of Project Blue Book, whether it was known as Sign or whatever its other code names were, it got passed around between a couple different people, and Robert Friend is one of the major players here. So I guarantee at one point he had a team investigating one of the cases we've talked about.
Okay. That name just sounds familiar.
Yeah. Now, Friend would then report to Colonel Philip Evans, Deputy for Sciences and Components at the Aerospace Technical Intelligence Center. And if you had to ask UFO believers, and they have some evidence to suggest that they're not wrong, Colonel Evans was not about genuinely investigating UFO incidents. He was more interested in basically washing the Air Force's hands of responsibility for the investigation. And their evidence here is that apparently through exhausting half a year's worth of paperwork and effort, Colonel Evans had previously attempted to transfer Project Blue Book, all that responsibility, to basically anybody but the ATIC. He wanted nothing to do with it, but he was constantly denied by higher-ups, and so the responsibility to investigate UFOs sat with his team. And to make the situation even more tense, and one of the other really fascinating aspects of this case, multiple congressmen threatened the Air Force with congressional hearings because they felt they weren't doing a good enough job.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's like okay. Whenever you're looking at the governmental response to the world of weird, it always seems to be basically just like get it sorted, just fucking push it under the rug, find the easiest explanation for it, and like move on. You rarely get Congress being like, guys, come on, you're phoning it in a little too much. This is ridiculous.
I might go out on a limb here and say that there would be a congressional response to the Air Force not investigating hard enough because the Cold War was going on at the time, and it may have been a concern of, this is an unidentified flying object.
Yes.
Is it an alien thing, or is this a Russian or Chinese thing?
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking too, although I didn't get too into the details here, but it is an interesting aspect of this case. But I thought the same thing.
I really should have thought of that since the fucking Cold War panic plays such a big part in the TV show.
Niall,
but,
sometimes we're a little too UFO brain, but you're right. It's, I like, my first response upon reading this was like, wow, is this congressman like a 1950s like UFO enthusiast? But it's honestly probably more like what you said, Alex, where they were concerned with, Soviet interference. So some details on this. These hearings were actually prompted by pressure from the civilian organization National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP, which was then headed by former Marine Corps Naval Aviator Major Donald Kehoe. So I think another part of this too is that honestly they probably wouldn't have given a shit if like a UFO hunting organization like came to them and was like, hey, check this out, please do more investigation into this. But this one also had the backing of a former Marine Corps naval aviator, right? A major. This guy had some sway.
Well, Kehoe he's somebody in all this stuff. That name is also one that definitely comes to mind.
NICAP was the MUFON of the 50s through the 80s. It was a pretty like especially because of the UFO panic that was going on around that time period. The organizations, the UFO organizations, had a lot more sway and pull and popularity back then than they do now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
that's probably why. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, he had, of course, they had this like guy who was from the United States military also stepping in on behalf. But one of the things that I thought was really fascinating, let me just read a little tidbit from the wiki page on NICAP that I really love. It says here that until the mid-1960s, NICAP gave little attention to close encounters of the third kind. However, longtime NICAP member Richard H. Hall related privately that this position was tactical and not doctrinaire. In other words, NICAP did not necessarily dismiss occupant reports out of hand, but elected to focus on other aspects of the UFO phenomenon which would be perceived by mainstream observers as less outlandish and more believable. The attention given to the contactees of the 1950s, such as George Adamski and Truman Bethurum, who typically claimed ongoing contact with benevolent space brothers, was almost certainly a factor in NICAP's reluctance to study UFO occupant reports too closely. But with the 1964 New Mexico Lonnie Zamora UFO encounter, regarded by researchers as one of the most reliable UFO occupant reports, NICAP loosened its restrictions on studying UFO occupant reports. So, NICAP did not want to fuck with people who claimed they were abducted by UFOs until the 60s. And I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
That amused me.
That's definitely interesting, especially because one of the most famous abduction cases happened in the 50s with Betty and Barney Hill.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if they had any... I can't remember if they were involved in that one at all, but we have covered Betty and Barney Hill, and that one is pretty amazing and detailed. But yeah, I can't remember if they were involved or if Blue Book got involved. Honestly, I gotta go back and like cross-reference what cases Blue Book research that we've already talked about on the show, because... it's probably a pretty decent cross-section.
The whole network of UFO sightings and abduction cases are surprisingly linked by all of these people. You hear about Friend and J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée and all these ufologists and military people and even sometimes Congress people getting involved, and they have their little governmental fingers in all these pies.
Yeah. It's there. Yeah, especially through the 50s and 60s, it was very interconnected. So yeah, NICAP basically put pressure on Congress, and interestingly enough, the congressman wanted there to be a more thorough investigation of the UFO phenomenon, and in particular, Congressman Robert Smart said during a briefing on the matter that the Air Force ought to devote more resources to the investigation of, quote, those cases which appear to have intelligence, scientific, or public relation potential, end quote. Evans would eventually provide a report on the Red Bluff Incident and the UFO sightings surrounding it for Congressman Smart based on the Blue Book findings. And in this report, he concludes that witnesses must have seen the planet Mars and the stars Aldebaran and Betelgeuse through a weather phenomenon known as temperature inversion, in which a layer of cool air in the troposphere has a layer of warmer air laying on top of it, and it produces a sort of mirage. And this phenomenon, while a popular way to wave away UFO sightings since the early 50s, is met with skepticism by the UFO community. To them, it seems somewhat absurd that such a phenomenon could produce identical mirages for people who are dozens of miles apart from each other. And I think it's a fair claim. Yeah.
Mirage, it feels like a very localized phenomenon. Maybe I'm wrong, but this thing seems like you wouldn't be seeing the same thing at such different angles of this thing in the sky, right?
I think it would be like different depending on distance and like, I think so. I'm not a mirage scientist, but that's my assumption.
What? Kyle, I've been doing this podcast with you for so long thinking you were a mirage scientist.
I'm sorry to have lied to you about that.
You really fudged these numbers on your resume, didn't you?
I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I'll cross that one off and give you an updated resume real quick now, I promise.
Good. What were you going to say, Alex?
With the fact that there were multiple craft involved, because it said that it went south and then met up with his friend.
Yep.
I also think that sort of throws the mirage idea out a little bit, because if they're saying you're seeing these two stars and a planet, which are pretty stagnant things, like they don't move that fast through the night sky.
Right.
Like how's Mars gonna go south and then meet up with Aldebaran, and then they're gonna go off together and scan some other stuff?
Well, this is
when a planet and a star love each other very much.
Yeah, this just so happened to be the fastest that Betelgeuse was moving ever, and you know, as far as like the scale there, that thing had to be moving extremely fast to be witnessed in such a way. But yeah, I guess that's their official explanation, is somehow through this like weird refraction of like light through this temperature inversion, it produced a mirage. And what ends up happening here is this explanation allows Blue Book to shut Carson and Scott's case. But luckily for us, NICAP maintained interest in the incident. So still seeking answers, the officers ended up basically coming into contact with NICAP and staying in touch with each other. And a little fun fact for us Indiana boys about NICAP, their official website is managed by a man named Francis Ridge, who officially joined the Indiana-based leg of the NICAP investigation team in 1960, and he's been researching with them for over 60 years and currently lives in Newburgh, Indiana, but was born in Vincennes. So...
Hey, props to a king.
Yeah, absolutely. You drop this, king. It's your crown. So yeah. we got a big shit NICAP member in Indiana that, you know, I don't know if at his age he can use
does podcast interviews.
Yeah, does podcast interviews. But hey, if he does, I'm into it.
I gotta have that Hoosier pride.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in mid-November of 1960, Officer Carson got in contact with NICAP investigator Walter Webb. Carson sent Webb a copy of the official report, drawings of the object, and a letter elaborating on the incident. It's likely that we owe NICAP. They're one of the big ones for keeping this particular case in the public eye, like I mentioned before. People were not paying attention to this case too long after it happened. In the letter, Carson had this to say, some of the stuff that we didn't hear before. He said, "We made several attempts to follow it, or should I say, get closer to it, but the object seemed aware of us and we were more successful remaining motionless and allow it to approach us, which it did on several occasions. Each time the object neared us, we experienced radio interference." So the core addition here that's not in the initial report is that the radio interference, of course, but also... And that all the officers would experience that, including Fry and Montgomery. But most importantly, Officer Carson at least seems to have believed that the craft had intelligent life at its controls. Now, in October of 1960, we got NICAP's clapback to the Blue Book conclusion about the temperature inversion.
Hell yeah, go off.
Yeah. So NICAP had this to say: false AF answer in Red Bluff case, which... False as fuck answer? No.
False AF, queen.
It's a false Air Force. Jesus Christ, my brain. I've been poisoned by the internet.
I straight up was trying to figure out if you actually meant they said false AF, like no, false as fuck. No. Because that would be like so anachronistic feeling to me, but maybe that's an earlier designation than I thought. But no, Air Force makes way more sense.
Yeah. They say, in utter disregard of astronomical records, the Air Force has issued an impossible explanation of the August 13th to 14th UFO sightings in the vicinity of Red Bluff, California. A check of August 13th to 14th star positions by a NICAP astronomical advisor reveals these facts. 1. Mars and the two stars were below the horizon, invisible when police sighted the UFO at about 11:45 p.m. August 13th. 2. Mars did not appear until an hour later. Aldebaran was just visible above the horizon at 1 a.m. Betelgeuse did not rise until nearly 3 a.m. Apparently, the Air Force gambled that no one would check the star positions when they risked this answer. So...
Seems shaky.
Yeah, they're talking shit.
So, I'm kind of curious, though, if on the one date that they were or weren't visible, but on the date that gets jumbled in here, the next day at 10 o'clock, if maybe it was visible and that's what the Air Force was going off of.
Well,
not to defend the bad guys, but
right. I think it's suggested here that none of them would be in position until like wildly different times. And so I don't know much about star positions, but I imagine they would not be in position at 10. I don't know how that works, but it doesn't say anything about that.
Gotcha.
Okay. So they weren't just like going for a better day for their false story. It just was
right.
The story. They were just assuming no one who is an amateur ufologist that literally like is obsessed with the sky would look at when these things were and where they were.
Well, and then think about it too. Like they, I feel like at the same time they don't really care that. You'd think that maybe they don't care that a UFO organization has like some counter argument to their thing. But here's the funny thing. Oddly enough, NICAP's initial bulletin countering the temperature inversion explanation was only shown to select members of the organization. Yet somehow Colonel Evans would release another report a few weeks later stating it, quote, is an impossible task to determine what the exact light source was for each specific incident, but the planet Mars was the most probable culprit. And then in the report, Aldebaran and Betelgeuse are conspicuously absent. So he releases another report fudging what he said before, I guess, after NICAP's bulletin. So maybe
Which
it got
wasn't like a public thing?
No, it was a
just shown to
NICAP
certain
thing.
People?
It was for NICAP members.
Yeah, okay.
So the implication here, of course, is that somebody in the Air Force infiltrated NICAP to feed information to the military.
All right.
Double agent.
Yeah, pretty much. It's an interesting, like, there's only ever anything implied, but never any evidence to be like, there's a conspiracy going on and the Air Force has infiltrated these UFO organizations, but that's what they're implying. So, in 1964, NICAP would end up publishing a large collection of UFO cases in a text called The UFO Evidence, which included Carson's story as he related to Walter Webb. And this included Carson's letter, sketch, and official report. NICAP had stayed in touch with Carson, but they weren't the only ones who were interested. UFO researcher Lauren Gross is responsible for preserving tons of news articles, letters, interviews, and other similar media surrounding the Red Bluff Incident. Gross would publish many of these details in their multi-volume survey of the UFO phenomenon known as The Fifth Horseman of the Apocalypse, UFOs, A History. Now, if you're interested in digging into these interviews and such, check out SaturdayNightEuphoria.com. You can also find the declassified Project Blue Book documents on the case on archive.org. But this is effectively where the story ends. As I understand it, Carson and Scott, after the story kind of, stopped being circulated in the media, it was only these dedicated few people who stayed in contact with them, and Scott and Carson, as far as I can tell, never relented on their story. They always believed that what they saw was not explainable by this temperature inversion or stars or anything of that nature. And I know at least Carson maintained that whatever the craft was, it had intelligent life behind it.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's the Red Bluff Incident. A lot of implications on the U.S. Air Force side, especially with Project Blue Book. I mean, in the show that we've been watching, Hynek is like a skeptic, but he's also like seeing that there's some truth to these like UFO cases, and the government just wants to cover it up. They just want it gone and buried so that the public stops asking questions. And that seems to be what the UFO community thinks of Blue Book, which I guess it makes sense that they wouldn't accept any like official government investigation of UFOs.
Yeah, for sure.
Already very suspicious of the government, which is fair, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is the Red Bluff Incident. I thought this one was really cool, really interesting. A lot implied, but nothing particularly answered. And I do suggest if people want to check out the interviews where there's like a few more details with Scott and Carson. They have like just transcripts of those interviews in Blue Book and on the Saturday Night Euphoria website.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
This case seems to have a lot of aspects of a bunch of other very famous cases, just like pulled in and like copied and pasted almost into it. Like, first of all, the setting is in the middle of the desert in this population of like 10,000 area, which is the exact same as Roswell. And then you have the red lights, which get mentioned over and over and over again in a bunch of different places. And then you have a football-shaped UFO instead of a flying saucer, which was not common for the time, you know. I think most of the sightings around the 50s, 60s, and 70s were flying saucers, but this one's a little bit different and is more akin to UFOs that people are seeing nowadays.
Yeah, and I think too that like there is some suggestion that like they kind of say that like, well, it was football shaped from our perspective, but it might have been saucer like, and we were just seeing it from a particular angle. But it, you know, it's kind of unconfirmed. Like they were never close enough to actually tell. But football is ultimately, and you can find like all these sketches online because there's multiple sketches of the UFO. One from Fry, one from Carson. They both show football with like these glowing lights at each end and then windows along the side. So it could have potentially been a saucer shape, but it's not. They weren't certain.
Windows is another thing that sort of makes this stand out to me because you often don't hear about reports of UFOs with windows. One of the few examples I can think of a windowed craft being reported was in Gulf Breeze, which is a very hilarious UFO case that you two should definitely look into if you've got the time.
That sounds very familiar.
We'll have to do that.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Niall?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like there are a couple other windowed things that we've come across before. I just don't remember any. I'd have to go back into the fucking archives and look into. But I feel like that is a thing that's not common, but there are a couple of those out there. And I would be curious, just like, especially with the football shape and everything, if there's a particular like type of craft that's more likely to have windows, because that seems like they seem to be more in the like oblong crafts as opposed to like the saucers, because the saucers, I don't know why. I don't fucking know. But anyway, what was I don't remember what I was gonna say. Probably something stupid.
Ah, man, I wanted to hear you say something stupid, but that's okay.
I'll try to think up something.
Yeah,
else.
if you can think up something like really stupid to tell us here in the next couple minutes, that'd be great. But if you want, you can utilize that energy for the big question.
Oh, what I was gonna say is like, what does anyone have any theories about what the red light was doing?
That's not stupid, actually. And honestly,
no, that's I was wrong.
I didn't see like any like official theories put forth by anybody. The thing that's like weird is like they remark on like the way the red light was positioned as if not on some sort of like separate device, but literally just attached to the craft's base, you know, because they're like, oh, it has to like shift the entire machine to move the red light, the red beam. But they didn't have like any theory on what it was doing. And
because well, I just always think like when I hear something like that, I always just think to go, oh, is there a deep underground military base around there that like, you know, some sort of like they're running a scan or some nonsense. Like I because of my fascination with dumbs, maybe that's what I meant, is saying something dumb. I always am like, oh, but so if they're shining anything at the ground, are aliens looking for something in the ground? I don't know. But it comes to mind. Yeah. I always think about these fucking deep underground military bases.
Yeah, it could have been that the UFO, they were digging for something. Whoa, but I don't know.
I've almost made that. I also made I almost went into a whole Roxanne thing about these aliens not having turned off the red light.
Oh my
but
gosh.
I felt like that. See, there's my stupid thing.
Thank you. Your quota.
Yeah. Okay. So there's no theories on what this red light was.
And it's interesting too that Aleks, you mentioned how this is like out in these like sparsely populated areas, and then there's like military bases nearby. That's a lot of these UFOs, especially in the 50s and 60s. That's a pretty common theme. So it's where I think that's partially where like people kind of arrived at the conclusion that like either it's secret military craft, and that's why the military is like so adamant about covering this stuff up, or it's that the UFO is like inspecting military bases, like hunting out like military locations and things like that. Or military, the third option, of course, the military has procured UFO technology and is using it, which is, I guess, another type of secret military craft.
So the strange thing about that is whenever people talk about secret military testing, or like they're testing secret fighter jets or these craft, is this happened 60 years ago. Roswell happened 75 years ago almost. Why have we not seen any of the military? Why doesn't the military have flying saucers? Why do we still use F-22s,
Right. Yeah, that's
that's because the fucking military contracts are so wildly in the worst taste. It is so they build so many things that don't work just to like spend money and not renege on contracts. It's so fucking stupid.
Yeah.
The military industrial complex is the biggest scam in the world. So I'm not surprised that we haven't done the good stuff.
Selling $1 billion pieces of shit to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that like kills everybody that pilots it. Basically. It's so, I mean, I think if you were to put on your conspiracy hat, people would probably tell you like, well, they want to preserve that technology, that UFO technology, as a secret so that they can have that advantage over their enemies. But then like, obviously the skeptic in me is just like, okay, but there's literally no way to keep a secret that long that's that big and has that many people involved. It is just impossible to do that.
Yeah.
And then again, if we've been at war for the last, we've been at war in essentially nonstop since World War II. Like, when are they going to break out the flying saucers to attack Russia?
Yeah.
Or like, why aren't we having like reports of people in Afghanistan seeing flying saucers that have like the U.S. military logos slapped on the side?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I guess look, okay. I'm gonna fall deeper and deeper into the conspiracy K-hole here, because I don't think we would slap that information on our UFOs. I guarantee you can find some good UFO sightings out in those regions. In fact, I know you can. But if you're a conspiracy theorist who follows the whole military has procured UFO technology thing, then like, you're probably thinking, well, they keep it covert. They keep it super secret so that they can send their UFOs out there and nobody can identify them, and they get what they need out of it, whatever that fucking might be. Different sites in the Middle East to bomb or whatever. Different war, good spots to, you know what I'm saying? Like, but I share your confusion about like why our like military tech hasn't advanced in a meaningful way, and we're still doing this scammy sort of system. But
there is like a whole theory of disclosure that's I think it's referred to, at least in the book I'm reading for the Patreon, as like the Brookings disclosure, which is like a reference to the Brookings report, but like where they basically send out like a test thing to see the public reaction. And you could see UFO encounters and stuff like this as like a way of testing the public's reaction to all of this stuff and these military crafts that are using UFO technology. And because it creates a public panic whenever this stuff happens, they don't report it. They don't disclose it because it's, for the best quote unquote public interest or whatever the fuck. So that's like a thing that keeps popping up in various places that I look. And I if I were to pick a theory of like why, if this stuff exists and we haven't learned about it, that would be my theory.
Yeah, you could endlessly theorize about this stuff, but fact of the matter is, we just don't know. Personally,
nope.
I have no opinion because I don't when it comes to cases like these where I'm like suspending my disbelief a little bit, and I've heard so many
credible people tell me about witnessing UFOs. I don't know what this is, but I'm leaning towards military craft personally. Like, it could be like military craft that like was being developed for like Cold War bullshit, and then they scrapped it, and it is some weird thing. How they would be able to do a silent red beam shooting craft, I don't know. But I can't say one way or another if what is being told in this story is true, that I understand or have any theory on what it is.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think one theory that goes around that certainly would make a lot of sense for this specific encounter would be that UFOs are essentially drones from another civilization that exists somewhere in space, right? And so because they're drones, obviously these things would be scanning, and they would end up meeting up with each other to be most efficient and travel somewhere else, which is why it doesn't need to sort of have another device to make the red beam scan super well, because it's just going back and forth over land to sort of pick up what might be on Earth, rather than it being a craft that has to have like a pilot inside. It could be controlled remotely, or it could be autonomous,
Yeah, okay, so you're telling me that some poor schmuck named Glorp off on Zebulon 5 is like looking on a screen and accidentally scaring the shit out of 1960s highway patrolmen?
Yes.
Okay, I like that theory.
Yeah, and they have their own version of America's Army where they test people through video games to see if they'd be good drone pilots.
Yeah, they
for the Earth scanning project.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like that, they've got their own version of like the guy who comes up to you in Walmart while you're playing on one of the GameCube demos, which this has happened to me, and they tell me, "Oh, you like video games? Do you want to join the military?" Very fun recruitment process. Yeah, well, I love these theories. I think they're really fun. I never have once, even after doing this show for over 4 years, felt qualified to give any legitimate, like, to put my foot down on an answer for any of this stuff when it sounds like there's some, like, legitimate, like, when there's something to it like this, where I feel like there is something to this case. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah.
That's fair.
Are y'all ready for the big question?
I'm ready for the big question.
Excellent. All right. So, here's my big question. If you were to form a civilian organization for investigating UFOs that could sufficiently pressure Congress about UFO disclosure, what funny acronym would you make your congressman refer to you by, and what does it stand for?
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
I have one if you'd like. I cheated, but I do have one. If you'd like to take time to kind of ruminate on the question, and I can give you mine, and maybe it'll inspire you. Okay. My answer to this is I would be head of the People for the Hunting of Aerospace Rockets Without Terrestriality, aka PHART, FART. And I just would really like one of our congressmen to have to say fart, basically.
Yeah, that's really good.
Thank you.
If you can make somebody in Congress sit down or really, I guess, stand up in front of the rest of their whole, their constituents, their fucking co-work. Wow, I could not think of a single word for coworkers. God damn it. And just talk about their farts. It would be fantastic.
I'm not talking about their farts. They're talking about my organization, FART. So you could picture, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, just saying fart. Mm-hmm. It was like the sort of fun bit that I was going for. And I'm glad you're all enjoying it.
I'm so close. I need to figure out like one thing real quick.
Yeah, I've got one letter that I've got to think about. All
right, I figured mine out. So if you're gonna do fart, I'm gonna be the Bureau of Extraterrestrial Fact Acquisition.
Okay.
So that I'm BOFA, and so I can go in and then get to do a really sick burn on all of Congress when they ask me about BOFA.
Okay.
And I can say D's nuts.
That would be pretty epic. That would really get him.
I think I'd be the head of the Bureau of Aerial Logistics and Long-Held Secrets, so that they have to refer to me as the head of balls.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, good. So we've got fart, bofa, and balls. Okay.
And that here we go. Now we've all really outed the humor of this show as being about 10 years old. But, we're good.
We have this, hour-long, really, I think, great discussion on UFOs and stuff, and we end it with fart, bofa, and balls. That's beautiful, I think.
It's the dichotomy of It Gets Weird.
And that's why you should subscribe on Patreon to these two beautiful gentlemen.
Yes.
So you can always be the first to hear about news about farts, bofa, and balls.
Yes, yes, thank you, Aleks. That's perfect, actually. Because, Aleks, unless do you have any other thoughts you want to get out before we wrap this one up?
I just think this is a super interesting case that I had never heard about, and I think it's something that I'd like to look further into. I think I might check out those websites and see if I can get anything out of these interviews and transcriptions and stuff. Yeah,
I can shoot you the links after we're done here, because it is a really interesting read. It's super long, and there's a lot there, but for people who are into this stuff, I think it's a fun rabbit hole to jump into. But yeah, thanks again, Aleks, for coming on the show. I was my one worry was that I was going to pick a particular UFO case that you'd heard of before, and it was going to be not very exciting. But this case is great, I think, and really interesting. And I'm glad you're here to talk with us about it.
Absolutely, it was a pleasure.
It's been fun.
With that, Niall, I think we got to do some business before we wrap this sucker up.
All right. So if you want to find more of the podcast, which we're coming up on, 5 years here?
About there,
we're getting there.
A few months out, yep.
Yeah. So we have quite a back catalog. So if you want to find more of that, you can find us on Twitter at IGW Podcast.
You can follow us on Facebook.com/ItGetsWeirdPodcast.
And we're on all your favorite podcatchers, from Stitcher to Google Play to Apple Podcasts, Spotify. If you listen to podcasts somewhere, look up It Gets Weird, and we're almost certainly there.
And then, of course, email us at itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com. Aleks, I don't know if you know about this, but we canonically, at It Gets Weird, I have a bag that materializes the emails that are sent to us, and then we occasionally read them on the show. But the fact of the matter is, we eat the emails. That's the whole thing that we do with them. We love to get them, and then we eat them. We devour them as little digital morsels. So please, if you want us to eat your email, or maybe read it on the show, or both, go ahead and email us there. And then, like Aleks said, we have Patreon. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. $2 level, you get bonus content. $5 level, you get bonus content, but a bit more. And then we even have a $1 level where you can just kind of send us a tip. You don't get anything for it. It's just kind of a way of saying, hey, thanks for making a fun show. At the $2 and $5 levels, you get a bunch of bonus shows that we're doing. We're doing all kinds of stuff. You also get access to our secret Discord, where we chat with listeners of the show about all kinds of stuff. I think recently it was a lot of, we do have a listener who's been sharing very, very good pictures of their dog. So if that sounds interesting to you, please check it out. If you can donate, we would love that. If not, we understand, but if you can, you might as well, is what I'm saying. If not, please, we don't advertise. We specifically made a point to not advertise this show or interrupt with any bullshit advertisements. So tell your friends, tell your family, and tell your congressman. Tell your congressman about us. But with that is the end of this episode of It Gets Weird. Again, thanks so much, Aleks, for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks for having
Kyle.
me.
Absolutely. I'm Kyle, signing out.
I'm Niall. Peace.